Hey folks, we're here, and I have been playing Resident Evil 4 Remake a pretty good amount recently, and Resident Evil is one of my favorite franchises. Love horror games. It's been around since 1996, and playing the first three of them was very important to me as a younger kid, and it's just a fantastic series. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and rank the ones on here. Now, what I'm going to do to make it a little bit more fun for myself is I'm going to go in reverse chronological order. Everything's listed here in chronological order, so I'm going to start with Resident Evil 4 Remake. And that one, I'm going to be giving an A. It is fantastic, but I'm doing my absolute best to not give everything I very much like an S, because otherwise it degrades what an S means to me. So I'm also going to try to do it where I'm going to be very specific in my list. So, for instance, the S that's most towards the left is going to be the absolute best game, whereas the S that's most towards the right is the least best S game. So Resident Evil 4 VR, I actually have played this. I have it on the VR. It's Resident Evil 4 on the VR. I can't play it for super long periods of time, and because of that, I'm going to give it a C. Obviously, it's Resident Evil 4. It's a fantastic game. We'll get to the actual Resident Evil 4, but because I can physically only play it for 30-45 minutes at a time, it's much more of a tough procedure. I will say, playing it on the Oculus, being able to do cool stuff like grab the knife out like this or grab the shotgun behind your back is fantastic. But again, it's not something that I can play for, super long periods of time. Next up, we have Reverse, which I personally never played. So I'm going to leave that one off. I assume it's going to be like a D or something like that. I don't play online-only games. Same thing is true of Resistance. I'm not going to rank that one. Most likely it'd be a D or an F, but again, I don't do online-only games. I don't mess with that. Next up, this will be the first one to rustle a little bit of Jimmy's. Resident Evil Village, for me, is an absolute S. I think it is the best game on the new Resident Evil engine, the one that started with Resident Evil 7, the RE engine. It is a game that you can play over and over and over again. The amount of leveling and upgrading your weapons and all that is simply perfect. It's a game that I played through 7 or 8 times, which is really uncommon for me. Generally, I'll play a game once if I, like it. Maybe twice if I really enjoy it. I did everything on that game. I unlocked everything. I even did the double S on the Mercenaries to unlock that lightsaber or whatever it was. I just think Village was so just as close as perfect as possible. One of the big complaints I hear about it is on further playthroughs, the dollhouse part is, not as good. And I will definitely agree with that, but it's also one of those things, once you know what you're doing, you can get through it in like 5-10 minutes. And again, I know because I was not necessarily speedrunning it, but going through it quite a bit to unlock everything, and the sense of progression, the extra stuff you can do in the game is fantastic. The gunplay, the guns, everything is just fantastic about it. Resident Evil Biohazard, I am not the biggest fan of that game, so I'm going to give it a B. A couple reasons that I'm not doing it any higher. The enemies are very limited. I also am not the biggest fan of I think it's one of the weaker ones in the Resident Evil, the new engine one, the RE engine. I just don't find it as compelling as Village or Resident Evil 2 Remake or any of that. It's not something that I wanted to play again after I finished it. I know some people very much like it. I think it was a very important game, and it brought Resident Evil back from where 6 was, which was obviously awful. But it was fine with me. Resident Evil 3 Remake, I'm going to put that as a B, but behind Resident Evil Biohazard. Resident Evil 3 Remake, Resident Evil 3, as you'll find out, is one of my favorite games of all time. Resident Evil 3 Remake does have a lot of negatives to it. It is much too short. It cuts out the entire clock tower section. It cuts out, quite frankly, a lot. But there's a couple things when you look at it that are actually huge positives. The gameplay is top-notch on it. The fact that you can dodge as well as you can in the game is fantastic. I do really enjoy when you're in Raccoon City in the beginning and you're just kind of like figuring way around. That is peak Resident Evil to me. I really enjoyed that. Again, do I wish it was longer? Yes, but to me, the makings of a great game is not the gameplay hours, it's how much fun you have with it. I did go through it a couple times. It wasn't like Village where I, did it over and over again. There is certainly a lot to unlock in Resident Evil 3 Remake. It does hurt that the Nemesis parts are, for the most part, completely scripted. But again, the actual gameplay of it is fantastic, and I think a lot of people don't give the Carlos sections enough credit. It's really cool to go through the police station again as Carlos. Resident Evil 2 Remake, that is getting an A from me. I'm going to put that behind Resident Evil 4 Remake. I very much enjoyed Resident Evil 2 Remake. Resident Evil 2, the original one, is not my favorite in the series, as it would be for a lot of people. Spoiler warning. I do think it showed what Capcom could do to these remakes and allowed 3 and 4 to happen, which is fantastic. I love how they added a lot of stuff in terms of giving Marvin a lot more story, giving Sherry a lot more story, giving the Chief a lot more story, showing him as he's still a monster, but not like a ridiculously cartoon monster from the first one. One of my big complaints with it would be, unlike the original Resident Evil 2, where you could do Claire A, Leon B, and then Leon A, Claire B, and honestly, they're all different enough to be able to do it 4 times. I find the B scenarios to be pretty lacking, so much to the point where, besides the final boss fight, which is different, I really don't think that you need to go through the game necessarily twice, and definitely not 4 times. There's really no reason to do Claire A, Leon B, then Leon A, Claire B. There's just not enough there. That being said, the gameplay is awesome. It really just a breath of fresh air, and although it's annoying that the zombies are so ridiculously difficult, it feels more organic to how it would be, not just breaking their heads off in one go. Umbrella Corps, I also did not play because, like I said, it is mostly an online one. Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, I know there's going to be worse games on this list, but I'm going to give this one an F. It's a Gears of War style cover shooter. It's so generic that I feel like I should put it in the D rank, but the fact that it has the Resident Evil name is ridiculous to me. It's a very short game. It's very generic. Despite taking place in Raccoon City during the events of, or right up to the events of Resident Evil 2, you think with that kind of promise it would be a fantastic game. It's just, it's not the most broken game in the world. I'm mostly putting it in the F rank because it's just... It should have been so much more. It wasn't like one of those things like when you look at Resident Evil Resistance or Umbrella Corps where you're like, well, that's a bad idea, This was a good idea. They just made it so absolutely boring. Resident Evil Revelations 2, I do like a fair share. I'm going to put that ahead of Resident Evil 4 VR in the C rank. C rank to me is not a bad thing. C rank to me is an enjoyable game. I look at anything D being bad, F being awful, C being stuff that has major flaws, but it is enjoyable. I do enjoy the fact that it's co-op, although it is kind of funky that your second player essentially can't help you at all, or can help you very little, being Moira with Claire, who can't shoot guns for story reasons, or the little girl with Barry, who's a little girl so she doesn't use guns. That being said, the story is pants on head stupid. It's awful. The gameplay is very enjoyable. However, one of the things that really turned me off is the amount of extra stuff that you can unlock is actually ridiculous, to the point we were figuring out how many times you would have to play through the game to unlock everything, like all the little extra, like, oh, you save up your BP or CP points for it or whatever. It was like dozens of tries, through the game. And it's like, come on, what do you think, like, what kind of game do you think this is, And I always found that to be a little off. But that being said, not the worst thing in the series. It is enjoyable. It is something that you could play through and have a good time. Resident Evil 6, for me, is also F tier. I'm going to put it in front of... You know what? I'm going to put it in D. It's a bad game. It's a bad Resident Evil game. It's laughable at times. The reason I moved it from D to F is if you play it with a friend and you play it with a friend that's going to have fun with you and just like make fun of the fact of how silly and how ridiculous it is that Leon's in the president's office and has to like kill the president who just became a zombie, and essentially the Jake part is the most ridiculous action story ever. If you can take it with a grain of salt, which is not, by the way, how they intended to go with that, I think you could have a good time, which is how I played it the one time I did. It's actually too long of a game. It's ridiculously long. There are 3 quests and then an Ada quest. Leon's quest is another reason I put it in a D tier. It is okay. Leon's quest is okay. Sherry's, Jake's quest is awful. Chris' quest is mostly awful. And Ada's quest doesn't really even need to exist. So I really hope they don't remake it. I hope they don't continue down the line and do 5 and 6. That would be pretty bad. But I very much don't like 6. I want to put it in F, but there is some things I can see that's redeeming about it, although not very much. I do like Resident Evil Revelations more than Resident Evil Revelations 2. I'm gonna put this at a B tier, and I am gonna put it above both Biohazard and Resident Evil 3. As I mentioned before, the further left to the list, the better it is for me. It feels like old school Resident Evil. It has kind of that mixture of the Resident Evil 4 ridiculous, over-the-top action, but also has that horror aspect. It's cool to play as, it's Jill. It's cool to play as Jill again. I like her partner, who I believe his name's Parker. It's a very long game again. It's one of those where if you take it with a grain of salt and view it as like a side story, you can really enjoy it. It also has some, I forget what it's called, raid mode or mercenaries mode. That's actually pretty fun as well. You have Resident Evil Dark Side Chronicles. This is a Wii game that was like one of those House of the Dead style games. This one I'm going to put firmly in the C tier, and I'm going to put it behind Resident Evil 4 VR. It's a House of the Dead style game, except for it's very slow-paced. It retells the story of, I believe, 2, maybe Code Veronica, and some extra stuff with Jack Krauser from Resident Evil 4. It's fine. It's okay that it's in the series. It's something that really could ever work on the Wii, or like I think it was also on the PS3 Move, which essentially was the Wii. It's fine. Next up, we have Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles, which I'm going to put very slightly ahead of Dark Side Chronicles in the C tier. This one, I believe, retells 0, 1, and 3. I remember being very disappointed in the 3 retelling, although I very much enjoyed the 0 and the 1 retelling. And now that I think about it, I think Resident Evil Dark Side Chronicles retells 2. Maybe it's not Code Veronica, but it's slightly better. The games are very similar. I just think I would put that one, Umbrella Chronicles, a little higher because of the excuse me, the games that it has. Resident Evil Mercenaries 3D gets a D tier from me. Excuse me, behind Resident Evil 6. It is literally a 3DS game where all it is the mercenaries from Resident Evil 5. There is essentially nothing to it. The only reason I'm not putting it in an F is Mercenaries is pretty fun. If it also, like, this game shouldn't have existed. It should have been like an extra put in with maybe Revelations, since Revelations was a 3DS release, so shouldn't really exist. But Mercenaries has always been fun, so at least it has that going for it. Next up, we have one of the big ones that causes a lot of pain nowadays, which is Resident Evil 5. Let me say this, if you played this with the computer and not co-op with a person, I would say C tier, because I played it with a human all 2 or 3 times that I played it. I'm going to put it as B tier. I am going to put it in front of Resident Evil 3 Remake, behind Resident Evil Biohazard. Resident Evil 5 has a lot of problems, it does, but if you look at it as just a ridiculously over-the-top action game, it has some pretty cool set pieces. I still remember fondly fighting the El Gigante with the minigun. I know it's like a super silly thing to even think about it, considering where Resident Evil was. But you can have a good time with it. The fact that there is no inventory in a pause menu, you have to do it all in person, it's pretty cool. It also gives to a lot of horror, especially the parts where are more like the African, like tribal lands. it gets pretty scary. You know, obviously a lot of the game takes place during the day, which is cool. That the fact that they can still make it pretty frightening and have it, you know, during the day in sub-Saharan Africa. So again, not as bad as people take it. Resident Evil 4, I'm gonna put this as, and I know this is ridiculous for a lot of people. Resident Evil 4 is one of my favorite games of all time. I've played it a billion times. I'm going to put it in A tier simply because I don't want to water down the S tier and have like 6-7 games in the S tier. I believe over time, Resident Evil 4 has gotten much more love. Back in the day, it had a lot of hate from Resident Evil fans. I enjoyed it back in the day, even though I still prefer old school style tank control Resident Evil games. What else can you say? It's a fantastic game. I am putting it a little behind Resident Evil 4 Remake, specifically because I think the remake adds a lot of really cool stuff and really doesn't take anything away that I was, you know, worried about, oh, this was taken away. Catch me on a different day, and heck, maybe even by the end of this I might change it to an S, but right now I feel pretty comfortable putting it there. It's a fantastic game. I just think that with time, and especially in the new RE engine, things have outdone it. Especially considering a lot of the when I compare the original up to Code Veronica, there are no other games in the series like it. Because there are no other games that are tank control, pre-rendered backgrounds, fixed camera. Whereas I can compare Resident Evil 4 to the 2 remake, the 4 remake, 5, 6, all that, all those action-y games. And due to that, I feel that some stuff has improved on it. Next up, we have Resident Evil Deadly Silence, which is a really, really great version of Resident Evil 1 on the DS. The only reason I'm not putting this... I think I feel more comfortable there. The only reason I'm not putting it in the S tier is it is on the DS. However, they did so many good things with it. The game itself runs fantastic. It is a great... I don't think you would call it like a port, I guess would be the best way of putting it. It uses the bottom screen as a map, which was very common with games, but it felt right for this one. It is fantastic port. I don't think it quite fits up to where the original one is because it's handheld compared to console, but it is awesome. If you haven't checked it out, play it any way you can. Next up, we have Resident Evil Outbreak File number 2. I do not like the Resident Evil Outbreak games. I know many would disagree with me. I have tried multiple times to play them. I also, of course, did not play them back in the day when they were available online. I could be putting this in the B tier or something like that if I did and had a good time. Every time I boot these up, I just don't get it. I guess my brain doesn't work this way to kind of watch out for all these different characters in these different positions, to be able to, you know, think one way or the other. For me, with horror games, it's more of like, it's me, what am I doing? Yes, if there's someone following you, like, say, Ashley in Resident Evil 4, great. But in this one, it's just very difficult for me to go about that. Same deal with Resident Evil Outbreak. I'm going to put the original Outbreak just slightly behind Outbreak File number 2, because File number 2 adds some more stuff to it. They're essentially the same game. File number 2 you could look as like an expansion pack to it. A big expansion pack. But yeah, like I said, I never got it. I really hope of all games that they do a remake for Outbreak, because I think nowadays with the ridiculous amount of online play, that it would actually be a lot of fun to have like 4 people at the same time, almost like a Left 4 Dead kind of thing, but with a lot more like puzzle solving, inventory management, instead of just like, oh, shoot these guys, run away, it's all quick. I would enjoy like a Left 4 Dead style setting, but a little more chill. Next up, we have Resident Evil Dead Aim, which is awful. I'm gonna put this as F tier as well. I am gonna put it above Operation Raccoon City. It uses the gun con, which is a plus. It is very generic, kind of like I put Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City down at an F because it was super generic. It's very generic. There's very little you can remember from it. I have not beaten it, but I have tried multiple times. I want to do it for a Let's Play sometime, so hey, you might see that sometime. It is on my list of ones that, like, I have to do at some point. It just doesn't work for me. I like the fact that you can walk around with the D-pad on the back of the gun con, and the fact that it is a gun con game is cool, but there's nothing there for me. I think I'm going to keep it there for right now. Next you have Resident Evil 0, which is a solid C tier. I'm going to put it above the 2 Chronicles games. I am also going to put it, you know what? I'm going to put it to I'm going to put it right before Revelations 2. Resident Evil 0 is one of those games that has some amazing ideas. The first section with the train is incredible. The game looks incredible because it's based off the RE Remake engine, which we'll get to in a second. Rebecca's a cool character. Billy's kind of whatever. The problem with 0 is it's a 2-player game where it's a 1-player game with 2 characters. I don't necessarily mind the fact that there's no item boxes, but there's a couple things they could have done to make things a little bit easier. The fact that the shotgun or the grappling hook is 2 spots, and I think Billy only has 6 spots, maybe 8, is just too ridiculous. If you're not gonna put a item box, you can't do something like make the shotgun two slots. I do enjoy the leech enemies, and I enjoy the normal zombies. Some of the other stuff is whatever. Like the little monkeys are quite annoying, and they're not anywhere near some of the other stuff. Some of the puzzles are very cool and stuff that you never saw before or after. Because, again, it's a 2-player thing, but 2-player kind of by yourself, so you have to remember, hey, this is where Billy is, this is where Rebecca is Billy safe, is Rebecca safe, how's that working? That's the reason I'm not putting it any lower. I think it does have some really good ideas. One other negative is the game becomes very generic after the Spenser Mansion part. It's just like, oh, we're in another, like, industrial complex. Like, oh, we're in another kind of, like, rundown lab. It just, bleh. And it could have been so much more. Resident Evil Remake is absolutely S tier. I am going to put it behind Resident Evil Village because I think that Village is a much more playable game. Now, it is my opinion that Resident Evil Remake is likely the best overall experience in the series. They just took everything from the original and just booted it to 10. The Crimson Heads are awesome and scary. They could have just ported it to the Cube and made better graphics, but they really outdid themselves by putting all these new things in, like the death mask in the beginning of the game. If you knew the Spenser Mansion like the back of your hand, you did not know it anymore. The only reason I am putting it behind Village as of now is that it's just not as replayable kind of a game, at least for me. It is, in my opinion, the scariest game in the series. It is absolutely frightening. Lisa Trevor kind of moving around. Sorry for the noise there. Lisa Trevor moving around. The Crimson Heads. It is absolutely frightening. Now, to go from... Just going to pause that. To go from Resident Evil Remake to Resident Evil Gaiden. Gaiden's an F, and it is worse than Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. I have been trying to Let's Play this game for months, and every time I pick it up, and I try to learn it, and I try to continue on, I just can't. Everything is in the ship. Everything is exactly the same looking. It's impossible to tell where you're supposed to go. I give them credit for doing the battles the way they did. However, nothing about it works. It is truly awful. Although I will absolutely 100% Let's Play it at some point. I just keep dying over and over again. And I've played almost every game in this series to completion, and I can't get more than like 30 minutes into this one because it is so ridiculous. Next up, we have Resident Evil Survivor. I low-key like this game, so I'm going to put it at the C ranking. I'm going to put it right before Resident Evil 4 VR. A lot of people would put this in D or F, but there is something, I don't know if it's nostalgic about it or the fact that it's so absolutely ridiculous, but I'm not saying it doesn't take itself seriously, but it's not so serious like a Resident Evil 5 or 6, where it's like, especially 6, where they just take themselves so seriously that it's ridiculous. The fact that the story is so stupid and simple and feels almost like a House of the Dead kind of thing, although elongated, of course, with the terrible voice acting. And I'm specifically going to put it in C compared to D for Vincent's mother, which if you played the game, halfway through it, you get a phone call from Vincent's mother, Vincent being like the main bad guy of it. Spoilers. And she goes, "Vincent, it's your mother!" And it's just that bad. And it's a cutscene you like have to it's an automatic cutscene, and it's just wonderful. Gun Survivor 2 is a Japanese only game, so I'm not going to put that one up there. Code Veronica, I am going to put in A tier, and I'm going to put it I'm going to put it behind Resident Evil 4, but ahead of the other ones. Code Veronica is one of those games where it's you either love it or you hate it. I love it. I was actually just having an argument with one of my friends the other day about this. The positives far outweigh the negatives. The simple fact that the biggest negatives are Steve's an annoying character, Alfred's an annoying character, and the story's kind of dumb, is whatever. Because Resident Evil 1, when it first started, and honestly through the whole thing, the stories are kind of dumb. I mean, Resident Evil 1 is a B movie. They literally made it as a B movie on purpose. So I can't hold it that much against it. It is a very unique one because it is a tank control game with mostly a fixed camera. I believe you would call it still a fixed camera, although the camera moves with you, and the backgrounds are 3D rendered, and it's one of those, it might be the only one where they did it just like that. It's also a very long game, which I enjoy. You get to go through the military complex and Antarctica as Claire, and then the same thing again, but different parts as Chris, and then you can kind of meet up at you do meet up at the end and play a little bit as both of them. It's really cool to see Claire and Chris in the same game. The knife in that game is the absolute GOAT. It is one of the most satisfying weapons in the history of Resident Evil. Sincerely, getting a perfect knife swipe on a zombie, especially early in the game, when you get them at the knees just right, you will sometimes hit them like 8 or 9 times. They'll fall straight down, and you get them, and it's awesome. Bandersnatches, the big enemy they added to it, I think is pretty cool. I have seen online that people don't like it quite a bit. I like it. It's not as iconic as, of course, zombies or hunters or Tyrant. Speaking of that, Tyrant is a really cool boss battle. You fight him twice. Nosferatu, the dad that you fight down in Antarctica, is a really unique boss fight. It's not so ridiculously over the top like 5 or 6. And like I said, I have mostly good things to say about it. Yes, Steve's dumb. But so what? There's, annoying characters in every Resident Evil game. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, for me, gets an S rank. I am going to put that in front of Resident Evil Remake and behind I'm going to put that in front of Village. Oh, there we go. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is likely my favorite game in the series from top to bottom. I put it above Village because even 20-something years later, I can still play it over and over again. It's a concise game. It's not nearly as long as Resident Evil 2, but I think the randomness and Nemesis that they added to it makes it so much more replayable and refined. I look at it as one of the perfect sequels. A lot of people say Resident Evil 2 is the perfect sequel to Resident Evil 1. I look at Resident Evil 3 as the perfect sequel to Resident Evil 2. It enhances the gameplay. It adds the gunpowder mechanic where you can change all that stuff. You can get enhanced ammo. You can find your weapons in different spots. I really like all the Nemesis encounters are awesome. I like the fact that you have the 2 different choices to make many times through. Some of them as minor as the most minor one it's memed on is climb out of the hole, jump down the hole. Yeah, it's not that big, but some of the stuff is pretty big. Push Nemesis off the bridge near the end or jump off. That has a bearing on the ending. Not a huge difference, but the place you'll see Nemesis and the place you'll see Nikolai at the end will change. I can't say enough about it. The reason I put it so far up the list, in fact, at the top right now, is just the amount of playability. I speedran this game for a period of time, probably about 6 months. I probably beat it like 50, 60 times. I think my best time is like 50 minutes or something like that. I would not speedrun a game unless I absolutely loved it. And I also think the perfect speedrun of the game is like a white whale. Getting everything to work your way with all the randomness. And I'm not talking about like setting a world record, but even having like a very good run, even on my level, like which 50 minutes is like 10 minutes or 12 or 15 minutes off the world record. So it's nowhere near there. But even having a good run come through with that is just so satisfying. It is fantastic. Plus, the ice rounds, which I don't know if they're in any other Resident Evil game, is one of the best weapons in Resident Evil history. The Carlos part is very enjoyable, although not quite as good as the Carlos part in Resident Evil 3 Remake. I cannot say enough positive about Resident Evil 3. Going to Resident Evil 2, this is another one that'll rustle some jimmies. It is clearly an A-rank game, but I'm going to put it behind the Resident Evil 2 Remake. I think when looking at this, I prefer all these games, 2 Remake, Deadly Silence, X, 4, and 4 Remake more than Resident Evil 2. I quite like Resident Evil 2, and if you were looking at this as a nostalgia thing, Resident Evil 2 is the one I played the most by far. 98, 99, 2000, when I had it, I was 12, 13 years old, so I had a ton of time, I was playing it. It's a very enjoyable game, but again, it feels much more stiff than Resident Evil 3 feels to me. The fact that there's no randomness to it, and the fact that you just have less control than you do in Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil 3 gives you full control of being able to do the dodges when you want to, of being able to make the ammo that you want to, of kind of working out, oh, the gunpowder is not in spot A, so it's in spot B. That, to me, gives me so much more replayability than Claire A, Leon B. I think that's a fantastic part. And, of course, me putting in the A rank doesn't mean a negative thing. Anything that you look at in B, A, or S is a game I would highly suggest playing. And a very good game. C is like, yeah, you could. D is, you shouldn't. And F is, don't. So don't look at that as a negative thing. It's just I never liked it as much as, honestly, any of the stuff above it. And lastly, going with Resident Evil, the original one, I'm going to put this in S tier, and I'm going to put this... Oh, this is tough, because like I said, I'm doing it very specifically here. I am going to put this... I'm going to put this right there, with Resident Evil 3 being the best Resident Evil game of all time, Resident Evil 1 being second, then Village, then Resident Evil Remake. Why did I put the original Resident Evil above Remake? I think the original way the Spenser Mansion was laid out is absolutely incredible from a level standpoint. Yes, the live-action opening scene has been memed on to history. Jill Sandwich, you know, there are monsters in here, and what's his name, Richard, the guy who got bit by the snake's voice. Yes, but remember that game was made to be a B movie. It was made to be silly and over the top. I'm not even just putting it there. I try to be not nostalgic about it, and I'm not even trying to make it about importance to history. The ambience of Resident Evil 1 is unlike any other. It really is. The Spenser Mansion, the way it's set up, is unlike any other. The memos are some of the best ones, including the infamous or famous Itchy Tasty. It is one of the tougher games in the series, which I always appreciate. Obviously, there's different ways you can play. You can play the original Resident Evil 1, which is really ridiculously difficult. You can play the Director's Cut, which is a little easier. I think the Japanese one is easier than the American one, although I might have that opposite. I think that's the case, though. Just everything about it, you can tell it was made with absolute love. You can tell that every single room was planned out. The only reason I don't put it above Resident Evil 3 is Resident Evil 3 takes the gameplay from 1 and just... 2 made it better, for sure. 2 is a great sequel to 1. But 3 just makes it absolutely perfect. It's all I could ever want in a fixed camera Resident Evil game. Only slightly higher than the original Resident Evil, simply because 3 is so unbelievably replayable and really puts you into control of the game. We're talking everything in the S tier is so replayable and so amazing. I'm really just picking small parts in here to talk about. And again, some of the small differences between some of these A games or B games or C games are the smallest differences. But I feel very comfortable looking at this. I know people not seeing Resident Evil 4 in the S tier, probably not a great thing for people to see. I've probably played Resident Evil 4 the second most of any, behind Resident Evil 3. Again, the simple fact that I saw Resident Evil 4 Remake do it better does hurt in the long term. It does not take away from how important it was, how great of a game it was, but by comparison, looking at the whole series, I have to view it that way. So let me know what you think below. How would you do it? I will put the link to this in the description below if you want to put yours as well. That would be awesome to see. I'm sure that a lot of people would change it around. I'm perfectly fine not ranking the 4 at the bottom simply because I don't know. I mean, I would put them all in D's or F's anyways, but, you know, I can't say for 100%, you know, not playing Umbrella Corps. Like, yeah, it's probably an F, but I haven't tried it myself. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I super appreciate it. I had a good time talking about this, and I'm actually legitimately right now going to go and play more Resident Evil 4 Remake. So thanks for watching, guys, and have a great day.